It wasn't just the church which began to grow and thrive in the Third World. Uh, the era after the Second World War was an important area for a general spread of world influence away from the great powers. The great powers, of course, were involved in the what we call the Cold War, the struggle between the Soviets and what we also call the free world. But in some ways, the moral high ground passed to the global south. The Cold War looked, at one stage anyway, like a war of almost mutual annihilation, with a great deal of concern, particularly about the nuclear standoff. And it is interesting that this period includes what we now call the non-aligned movement. Nations which didn't really want to be involved in the struggle between communism and the free world. And though that movement was quite short-lived, something of the spirit of the non-aligned world actually created a moral climate which was extremely important. The heroes of that period tend to be non-Western, non-whites. People like Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King in the States, and Nelson Mandela in South Africa were and have remained the people we want to admire from that period. And I think that was extremely significant. The biggest event of the second half of the 20th century, quite late on, was the fall of communism. From 1989, we have a string of events which led to the collapse of that international movement and ideology. We know about the Berlin Wall, but also the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And this created real possibilities for mission. There were areas of the world which had been closed to mission for some while, which were now open or reopened. Areas such as Central Asia and Eastern and Central Europe. There was a brief period of considerable optimism, and politically, the United States seemed more than ever the dominant power. Francis Fukuyama wrote a famous essay called The End of History, in which he suggests that the liberal capitalism of the United States and her allies was the only show in town. There was nothing really else that history needed to reveal to us. This period of optimism did not last very long, and of course it ended dramatically with the events of 9/11. Perhaps 9/11 was the product of the rise of fundamentalism, and of course that was something which had happened a little earlier. But 9/11 was a signal that all was not well. And of course it led to all sorts of developments, such as the war on terror as a sort of permanent state, which included things like the invasion of Afghanistan and of Iraq, the greater alienation of the Muslim world from the West, it would seem, the continued rise of Islamic fundamentalism, but other fundamentalisms as well, such as Hindu and Buddhist and even Christian. It was, in fact, the beginnings of a new age of anxiety, an age perhaps of greater risk. Mission 2, I think, was affected by this. People began to wonder about the whole mission enterprise. Along with the what I've called the age of anxiety, there is a real power shift that we can notice in world events. It began really with the economic success of nations like Japan and the Asian tigers. But that economic shift eastward has continued with the current rise of China and India, today the fastest growing economies. In any case, it may be irrelevant soon to talk about national leadership or national hegemonies. The truth is that with the information revolution and what we now call globalization, world history has to be seen on a wider stage than a national one. The recent economic troubles that we are having have a global dimension. Everybody is affected and everybody is contributing. Similarly, the fears about the environment and global warming, that is a global issue which cannot be addressed in any way as simply a local problem. And we might say the same about the growing gap between the rich and the poor. So that the future seems problematic, and Mission has responded to this to some extent by saying, well, Mission 2 is global. Mission is from everywhere to everywhere. And yet the most important development of the recent past, which is the growth of Mission from the Global South instead of to the Global South, is itself very much constrained by the recent economic downturn. In fact, economics are always going to play an important part in that whole movement. Finally, let's go back again to Edinburgh 1910. I noticed right at the beginning that we were talking about people who were extremely optimistic about what Mission could do in the next years and decades. They felt that Mission could change the world. They were no doubt aware that world events also provided the context for Mission, but they felt that the initiative was with them. This talk may have made you feel that the reverse is true, that world events bear down upon us so heavily that Mission has all that it can do to react to them. But I hope that we too, as people who are concerned about God's mission in the world, will believe as we look out at the world that Mission can change things, that Mission can have an effect on world events, that God's mission is still possible in the world in which we live.